Chapter 2, The Shadow, Peter Pan by JM Barrie, Part 2. "What fun!" he said doubtfully, and they did not dare expose him when Mrs. Darling and Nana returned. "Nana, good dog," he said, patting her. "I have put a little milk into your bowl, Nana." Nana wagged her tail, ran to the medicine, and began lapping it up. Then she gave Mr. Darling such a look, not an angry look. She showed him the great red tear that makes us so sorry for noble dogs, and crept into her kennel. Mr. Darling was frightfully ashamed of himself, but he would not give in. In a horrid silence, Mrs. Darling smelt the bowl. "Oh, George," she said, "it's your medicine." "It was only a joke," he roared, while she comforted her boys, and Wendy hugged Nana. "Much good," he said bitterly, "my wearing myself to the bone trying to be funny in this house." And still Wendy hugged Nana. "That's right," he shouted. "Coddle her. Nobody coddles me. Oh, dear, no. I'm the only breadwinner. Why should I be coddled? Why?" "George," Mrs. Darling entreated him, "not so loud. The servants will hear you." Somehow they had got into the way of calling Liza the servants. "Let them," he answered recklessly. "Bring in the whole world, but I refuse to allow that dog to lord it in my nursery for an hour longer." The children wept, and Nana ran to him beseechingly, but he waved her back. He felt he was a strong man again. In vain," he cried. "The proper place for you is the yard, and there you go, to be tied up this instant." "George," Mrs. Darling whispered, "remember what I told you about that boy." Alas, he would not listen. He was determined to show who was master in that house, and when commands were not draw Nana from the kennel, he lured her out with honeyed words, and seizing her roughly, dragged her from the nursery. He was ashamed of himself, and yet he did it. It was all owing to his too affectionate nature, which craved for admiration. When he had tied her up in the backyard, the wretched father went and sat in the passage with his knuckles in his eyes. In the meantime, Mrs. Darling had put the children to bed in unwonted silence and lit their night lights. They could hear Nana barking, and John whimpered, "It is because he is chaining her up in the yard." But Wendy was wiser. "That is not Nana's unhappy bark," she said, little guessing what was about to happen. "That is her bark when she smells danger." "Danger? Are you sure, Wendy?" "Oh, yes." Mrs. Darling quivered and went to the window. It was securely fastened. She looked out, and the night was peppered with stars. They were crowding round the house as if curious to see what was the next place there. But she did not notice this, nor that one or two of the smaller ones winked at her. Yet a nameless fear clutched at her heart and made her cry, "Oh, how I wish that I wasn't going to a party tonight." Even Michael, already half asleep, knew that she was perturbed, and he asked, "Can anything harm us, Mother, after the night lights are lit?" "Nothing, precious," she said. "They are the eyes a mother leaves behind to guard her children." She went from bed to bed, singing enchantments over them, and little Michael flung his arms round her. "Mother," he cried, "I'm glad of you." They were the last words she was to hear from him for a long time. Number 27 was only a few yards distant, but there had been a slight fall of snow, and Father and Mother Darling picked their way over it deftly, not to soil their shoes. They were already the only persons in the street, and all the stars were watching them. Stars are beautiful, but they may not take an active part in anything. They must look on forever. It is a punishment put on them for something they did so long ago that no star now knows what it was. So for the older ones have become glassy-eyed and seldom speak. Winking is the star language. But the little ones still wonder. They are not really friendly to Peter, who had a mischievous way of stealing up behind them and trying to blow them out. But They are so fond of fun that they were on his side tonight and anxious to get the grown-ups out of the way. So as soon as door 20 of 27 on Mr. and Mrs. Darling, there was a commotion in the firmament, and the smallest of all stars in the Milky Way screamed out, "Now, Peter!"